Good morning. Today is Monday. Today we're going to be learning the seventh Perek of Eiruvin. It's a long Perek. So we're gonna get into it. Today's shiur is the Ilay Nishmas, Aaron Nachum ben Simcha Cohen, Yeshua Mordechai ben Shepsel, Racha Sarah Bashmoleb, and Binah Moshe ben Yosef. May the Neshamas all have an aliyah. And refuah shleima for Ad Sarvas Leachan Pesel Bas Yenta Yisrael ben Rachalea Rachel Bas Pesel Zelda Arvam Yisrael ben Risha and Chaya Bas Bela refuah shleima b'Sol Shar Choli Yisrael. Okay, Perek Zion Mishnah Aleph begins. We're talking about two courtyards that are separated by a wall of at least 10 tefachim high. The wall has a window through which objects can be passed. This is a little weird today. Let's see. Okay. So when there's a window and a wall between two courtyards, and the window is at least 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim in size and within 10 tvachim of the ground, then the residents of the two courtyards can make they make two independent eruvim if they wish, because because the wall divides the courtyard into two separate areas. Or if they want, they can make one eruv, one common eruv, because the window is considered an entranceway between the two courtyards, and since it's large enough and close enough to the ground to be used conveniently as an entranceway between the two courtyards, then they may be considered as one unit and joined together in a single eruv. However, if the window is less than 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim in size, or the malam or is entirely above 10 tvachim from the ground, they may make only two independent eruvs. But they cannot make one common eruv. In this case, the window is not considered an entrance, so that the courtyards are two completely separated areas. A window that is smaller than 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim is not easily used as an entranceway from one courtyard to the other. Similarly, a window that is higher than 10 tvachim above the ground is also not easily used as an entranceway. Therefore, if the window is too small, too high off the ground, the two courtyards may not join in a single eruv. Okay, Mishnah Beis. Kosel shebank shtei. If a wall between two courtyards, Gavoa Asara Rachav Arba is 10 tvachim high and 4 tvachim thick, Ma'arvin Shnayim, that the residents of the two courtyards may make two independent eruvs. Ve'ein Ma'arvin Echad, they may not make one common eruv because the wall completely separates the two courtyards. Hayu Barosho Peros, if there was fruit on top of the wall, Ilu Olin Mikan V'Ochlin, Ilu Ochlin, the residents of both courtyards may climb on top of the wall and eat the fruit of Avad, Shelo, Yoridu Lamata, provided that they do not carry any fruit down into the houses of the courtyards. Since the top of the wall is 4 tvachim wide and 10 tvachim high, it qualifies as its own Rishus Hayachid. Therefore, carrying on top of the wall itself or from there to either courtyard is mutter. But carrying from the top of the wall down into the houses of the courtyard is usher, because the top of the wall is not included in either courtyard's eruv. So if the wall was breached, the Esr Amos, up to a length of 10 Amos, the residents of the two courtyards may make two independent eruvs. And if they want, they can make one eruv. Because the breach is like an entranceway. Since an entranceway is a common part of a wall, the partition remains valid. Yasam Yikan, however, if the breach is wider than 10 amos, then the residents must join in one eruv. But they may not make two independent eruvim. I mean, a breach that's wider than 10 amos is too large to be considered an entranceway and invalidates the mechitza. Therefore, the courtyards are considered one area, and if the residents want to make an eruv, they must all join in one eruv for both courtyards. Okay, Mishnah Gimel. Charich ben shtei if there's a dish that separates between two courtyards, amok asarav rochav arba, and it is 10 tvachim deep and 4 tvachim wide, ma'arvin shnayim, the residents of the two courtyards may make two independent eruvs, but they may not make one eruv. But this size completely separates the two courtyards since it is considered a wall, 10 tvachim high between them. Therefore, they may join only in two independent eruvim. Afilu malikash tevin. This is so even if the ditch is filled with stubble or straw. Although the ditch is filled in, we assume that the stubble or straw is being stored there temporarily and will eventually be removed. Therefore, it does not invalidate the partition. However, if the ditch is filled with earth or pebbles, ma'arvin echad, ein ma'arvin shnayim, they may make one eruv, but they may not make two independent eruvim, since the earth or pebbles will likely remain in the ditch is considered filled in and no longer creates a partition between the two courtyards. Hence, therefore, they must be regarded as one and cannot join in two separate eruvim. Okay, Mishnah Daled. Nasan alav nasesh hurachav abar tvachim. In one place, the board that is 4 tvachim wide over the ditch that serves as a bridge connecting the two courtyards. And similarly, if there are two balconies facing each other across the Rishus Harabim, and they are connected by a 4 tefach wide board over the Rishus Harabim, ma'arvin shnayim, they may make two independent eruvs, v'imratzu ma'arvin echad. Or if they want, they may make one eruv because the board serves as an entranceway connecting the two areas. The residents of the courtyards on both sides of the ditch, or the residents of the houses with the balcony separated by Rishus Harabim, may join in a common eruv because they are connected by a bridge. Pachas mikan, however, if the board is less than 4 tvachim wide, ma'arvin shnayim ve'em ma'arvin echad. They may make two independent eruvs, but they may not make one eruv. Since people are afraid to walk across a bridge that is narrower than 4 tvachim, it does not serve as an entranceway connecting the two areas. Mishnah Hay. If a haystack separates between two courtyards, and it is 10 tvachim high, then the residents of the courtyards may make two independent eruvs. But they may not make one eruv. The haystack is like a wall. Since it's 10 tvachim high and it separates between the two courtyards along the entire boundary, they are considered completely separate from each other, and they must therefore make separate eruvs. Although the haystack is what separates them into two independent eruvs, the residents of this courtyard may guide their animals to eat from their side of the haystack. And the residents of the other courtyard may guide their animals to eat from their side of the haystack. The residents need not be concerned that their animals will eat so much straw without anyone noticing that the height of the haystack will shrink to less than 10 tvachim and no longer be considered a partition. This is because the partition is not considered invalidated unless its height has been reduced to less than 10 tvachim along a section wider than 10 amos. And it's highly unusual for animals to eat that much during one Shabbos. If before Shabbos the height of the haystack became less than 10 tvachim along a section wider than 10 amos, they may make one eruv, but they may not make two independent eruvim, since the haystack no longer qualifies as a partition, The two courtyards are considered as one, for which only a single eruv can be made. Mishnah Vav talks about making a shitufei mevaos, a shituf, whereas a eruv can only be made with bread. A shituf is made by placing food, all types of food, contributed by the residents of all the courtyards into the alley, into one of the courtyards. I mean that all the residents of the alley need to put food together. Since it's a burden to collect all the required food from all the households whose courtyard opens to the alley, so we have a more convenient solution. What is a practical way to make a shita for an alley? One person places a barrel containing his own food in the courtyard and declares, "Let this food belong to all the residents of the alley." And he may grant ownership of the food to them. Even through his adult son or daughter, or through his Jewish manservant or maidservant, his slave or his maidservant, Ishto, or through his wife, any one of these can act as an agent for all the residents of the alley to acquire the food on their behalf. But he may not grant ownership to them. No, it will be to time. Through his minor son or daughter, or through his kin, or through his Ever Kanani or Shifcha, because their hand is like his hand, that is, whatever they acquire belongs to him. Therefore, they cannot be agents to transfer ownership of the food to the other residents, since they are unable to remove it from his possession. Regarding Mishnah Zayin, generally, a person can act as an agent to remove for another person only with that person's express consent, or it's obvious the other person wants something done for him. One can act on behalf of the other person without asking him. So now we're discussing how this law applies to making a shituf mevaos on behalf of others in a case where a courtyard opens into two alleys. Okay, this might in a case where the food used for the shituf of an alley became diminished from the required amounts before Shabbos began. Mosif Mazaka, one may add his own food to replenish this amount and grant ownership of it to other residents. And he need not inform them and get their consent, because when the shita was originally formed, they consented to join with this alley. However, if more residents were added to the courtyard, and the shita food is insufficient for the new residents, Mosif Mazaka, one may add his own food to reach the required amount and grant ownership of it to the new residents. But he needs to inform them and get their consent to join them in the shituf. Since the new residents have not yet revealed which of the two alleys they wish to join, they cannot be added to the shituf without their consent. Mishnah Ches. Kama shiur, how much food is required for a shituf? Bisman shehein merubin, when there are many residents, meaning 18 or more, mazon shtei sudas lekulan. The amount of food eaten by a single person in 2 meals is it satisfies the requirements for the entire group. Since the shituf as a whole contains a significant amount, it is kosher, even though each resident's personal portion is small. But when there are few residents, fewer than 18, each resident must contribute a portion of food equal to the volume of a dried fig, which is the minimum amount of food for which one is liable for carrying on Shabbos. Since each individual contributes a significant amount, the shituf is mutter, is kosher, even though the shituf as a whole contains less than the amount of 2 meals. Mishnah test. Mishnah test is talking about um, eruv chatzeros. So Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi said, "Amen. When did these amounts apply regarding eruv? The tchilas eruv, only to the beginning of the eruv. I mean, only when the eruv first goes into effect. I'll be shiur Bishire Eruv Kosher. But as for the remainder of an Eruv that once had the full amount of food and some was then lost, even if a small portion remains, it is enough. It need not be replenished for the upcoming Shabbosos. Below Amrul the Ari Bechatzeros. This is because the only reason the Chachamim said that the residents must make an Eruv Chatzeros was when there is a shituf in place, Ella Kedei Shlo L'Shakechas Atanavos. So that their children should not forget the law of eruv chatzeros. Since the shituf is kept in only one courtyard, the kids who live in the other courtyards might not be aware of the shituf at all, and therefore might grow up assuming that the carriage between houses and the courtyard is mutter without any procedure, either an eruv or a shituf. Therefore, although the Chachamim required an eruv, even when there is a shituf, they will lean into that eruv and consider it valid even after the amount of food was diminished. Okay, two more to go. Mishnah Yud. Bekol Eiruvin u'mishtatim. All foods may be used to make a eruv techumen or a shitufei mevaos. Chutz min hamayim melech, except water and salt, because they are not considered significant foods. Additionally, all breads may be used for eruv chatzeros, whether whole loaves or broken loaves. This is according to Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Yeshua says, Kikar hu eruv, only a whole loaf of bread may be used for eruv chatzeros, not a broken loaf. Afilu ma'afe saw. Therefore, even a huge loaf baked from a saw of flour, the heat prusa ein ma'arvin ba, may not be used for an eruv chatzeros if it is broken. Kikar be'isser. However, even a tiny loaf the size of an isser, which is a small coin, who shalem ma'arvin may be used as an eruv if it is whole. And the last mishnah for today, purchasing a share in an eruv in advance. Mishnah Yud Aleph, Nosnein Adam Ma'al Lechadbani Ulenachta. A person may give a ma with a small silver coin to a grocer or to a baker. Today, she is kilo eruv, so that when the other residents of his courtyard come to buy food for the eruv, he will own a part of the eruv, and the storekeeper will add the portion he paid for, thereby making him part of the eruv. Although movable objects such as food cannot usually be acquired simply by paying for them, the Chachamim allowed it in this case in order to make it easier to make an eruv. This is according to Rabbi Lezer. The Chachamim say they disagreed. Lo zachu lo ma'osav. His money does not acquire a special share in the eruv for him. According to the Chachamim, no special leniency was made for making an eruv. Therefore, the portion the storekeeper gave on his behalf never belonged to the person who gave the ma, and he has no share in the eruv. Modim b'shar kol ha'adam. However, the Chachamim agreed that if he paid another person who was not a grocer or baker to acquire a portion of the eruv on his behalf, his money enables him to own a portion of the eruv food. Since ordinary people do not sell food, the person giving the money clearly intended to pay the other person to be his agent and to acquire a portion of the eruv on his behalf, and then give it for the eruv. The money he provided was for the service rather than as payment for the food. Because we cannot use a person's possessions to make an eruv without his consent, since the person gave the money to buy food and this was not effective. Even if the storekeeper would give food for him, to the eruv collector and grant ownership of it, keeping the money as his fee, this too would not be effective. This is because the storekeeper would be using this person's money in a way that he had not been authorized to do so. The storekeeper would therefore be using the person's money to make an eruv for him without his consent. According to the Chachamim, this is not effective. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says, "When was it said that we cannot use a person's property to make an eruv for him without his consent? Only with regard to eruv techumim, because it is not a clear benefit to the owner, since an eruv techumim extends his techum one direction but limits it in the opposite direction. But with regard to eruv chatzeros, which is a clear benefit to a person, and allows him to carry from his house to the courtyard, we may make an eruv for a person with or without his consent, because the rule is that we may benefit a person without his consent, but we may not disadvantage a person without his consent. Thank you for joining us. Tomorrow we will continue with Perek of Eiruvin. Have a wonderful day.